Minute by minute, the Seahawks have been waiting to say, this is it. And now they have. The question is what a fool believes versus, is this it? We got coaching news galore. I'll explain all of these. Trust me, there's a pattern to it. It's time for Inside Coverage. Welcome to Inside Coverage, part of the Zero Blitz family, presented by Prime. He's Charles Robinson. I'm Jason Fitz. And look, I made all the Michael Macdonald jokes I possibly could. I got to get them all into the intro. So all famous songs by Michael Macdonald, because Mike Macdonald has become the new head coach of the Seattle Seahawks at a brisk 36 years old. See, Rob, every time the coaches get younger and younger, I feel older and older. Like there's just this moment for me where 36 as a head coach of an NFL team. Marvelous. Like what were you doing at 36? Where was Charles Robinson at 36?
I was working here.
I mean, there we go. Like that's amazing. That is, yeah. Okay. So admittedly 36 was right. I was still on a tour bus. So like I wasn't even 36. I didn't even realize I'd be doing this for a living. There we go. Mike Macdonald is now the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. I can't say I'm surprised, obviously, because I think a lot of people expected this would come into play. Obviously, as you start to look at it, I mean, what's your initial reaction?
I mean, okay, there's a few different things I'm interested in here. He's half Pete Carroll's age, right? So you go from 72 to 36. And he's probably half the extrovert that Pete Carroll is. They're not similar guys in that respect, where Pete Carroll's going a million miles an hour. Always make the joke about, I always say he's chewing 100 pieces of gum at once, taking the shirt off with DK Metcalf, all that. That's not what you're getting from Mike Macdonald, okay? He's a much more reserved individual, however, extremely smart. When you talk to people in the Ravens organization, this is a guy who came up through the ranks as an intern, was a position coach, left to be the defensive coordinator of the Michigan Wolverines in 2021 under, obviously, Jim Harbaugh, which was a very intentional move between the two brothers, Jim and John. He knew, I think they both knew this was a guy who had serious potential as a coordinator and to be able to earn his stripes that year on the college level, in which he was fantastic, and then return to the Baltimore Ravens and replace Wink Martindale. It fit perfectly for them. It's interesting. He was never a college football player. He's never a pro football player, which is, to me, always notable when someone becomes a head coach, because in tough times, it's not uncommon to hear players grumble like, hey, this is a guy who doesn't really understand what it takes on this level, for, from a player's perspective, things like that. But it can work. There's no question about that. I think what people need to know about this guy is his defenses are pretty complicated, and he will ask players to do a multitude of different things. I actually spoke to someone in Baltimore about a week ago. We were just I was sort of poking around saying like, hey, is there any way if he doesn't get an NFL job, would he go to Michigan and potentially be the head coach if Jim were to leave? And, they basically were like, no, he's going to have head coaching opportunities, real head coaching opportunities in the NFL level. So he wouldn't leave. But as we sort of talked about him, one thing that this staffer said to me is, we're probably going to lose him after this year, which is unfortunate because the players really just emerged into the scheme this year. It took them basically an entire year to get their feet wet, and then really to, get in sync with it fully. This was the season where they finally hit it running. So there's some lag time because of the complication that he expects in the defense. And I'll give you one player that's really interesting. Kyle Hamilton, the safety there. This was a guy who played deep coverage for them, right? He played man-to-man coverage, and he was a part of all kinds of different blitz packages. So when he gets his hands on a really versatile player, he's not afraid to move that player all around the field and do different things with them. They're going to be versatile players on that Seattle offense, Seattle defense. In particular, in the secondary, they have a number of extremely high-level athletes. So it'll be interesting to see what he's able to accomplish with Seattle. And he's a young coach, but he's going in with a pretty young roster, okay? And also a roster that has a lot of young defensive talent. they're two parties I think that can grow together. I do think it's a good hire. I'm interested to see developmentally how long it takes, though, for those players to fully pick up his defense.
I think that's part of what gets really interesting to me about first-time coaches, young head coaches in general. Like, to what you just mentioned, there's always this line. Like, whenever a defense isn't playing well that's complicated, you hear players say, well, we got to simplify things, right? And then whenever a defense is too simple, it's like, well, everybody knows what we're doing. Right? So there's no right or wrong on it. But when you are 36 and you are coming into this sort of an opportunity and you do have complexity as part of your fabric, I think what really immediately becomes interesting is now you're not just responsible for the defense. We talk about this all the time. You're a CEO, so you got to be able to manage everything. B, who's going to run your defense the way you want to run your defense? And C, how do you bring that level of complexity that defines you on that side of the ball? Will it define you offensively? That's why I think the coordinator hire is going to be incredibly interesting for this job specifically.
Yeah, and we'll see the directions they go, with the coordinator positions. But to me, he's going to call his defense. Okay, he's going to install his defense, regardless of any of the defensive coaches that they bring in. He's going to be the person who is out in front of it. And as you said, it can be tough, particularly when you're a first-time head coach, to handle those sort of CEO duties, the overall duties of having to have your hands all over the organization, but then also be installing an intricate defense on top of it. So, look, that's a challenge. Absolutely. That's going to be a challenge for him. But again, I will say this, to have someone work your way up. And remember, the Ravens that's a hell of an organization to work your way through, from an intern to a position coach to a defensive coordinator, to do it with intent, going the Michigan route, knowing like, hey, you're going to be groomed to be a defensive coordinator. Now let's see you go to college, connect with all these young guys. Okay. That's another thing too. I think people are like, well, geez, if he's kind of introverted, is he going to be able to connect with players? He didn't have any problem connecting with defensive players at Michigan. Okay. They had a hell of a defense when he was there. He was very, very good at his job. And I think it showed John Harbaugh very quickly, like he's ready. Like hey, the Wink situation with us, it's not quite working out. He's ready to come back and take this over. And by the way, he came in, they got better, but then really in that second year was when you really saw them flourish. And when you look at that defense, it's not a bunch of wallflowers on that defense. Okay. Roquan Smith, a veteran, all pro level player, Patrick Queen, the entire secondary, him taking Kyle Hamilton, a young player, and saying, hey, I'm going to throw everything at you. Our scheme flexibility is going to be our player flexibility. So if I can teach you to do 3 different jobs, we can do all kinds of different complicated things with our scheme. And he's doing that at 35, 36. So I think if he can handle the overall head coaching aspects of it, standing up and giving speeches, being a leader, having his door open for an entire coaching staff, building a coaching staff, and then installing his scheme, I think this could be a very, very good hire for Seattle. And frankly, it fits perfectly for how Jody Allen, the chairperson of the chairwoman of the Seattle Seahawks, want them run, which is John Schneider's got the draft. John Schneider, the general manager, has got the roster. And John Schneider, the general manager, is going to have some input on the coaching staff hires as well. He fits into really what that structure is organizationally.
That structure also becomes interesting to me because, me, I love to look at these partnerships, right? So how valued is one side or the other? I feel like if I'm a coach and I was looking at all of the available gigs, there are appealing things to the Seahawks opportunity when you talk about the franchise. Like so often when a guy's coming in to take over, it feels like it's complete rebuild. Everything's lost. The place has gone to hell. Like none of that is true for Seattle. So Seattle sustains success. So for a coach, you're coming in with a front office that obviously still knows what they're doing, with the front office that has a true structure. Like it actually feels like a really good fit for a young coach to come into that's not necessarily at the same power point that some people would be later in their career, because all of the elements around. Like that's part of what I like Macdonald with the Seahawks as much as I like the Seahawks with Macdonald, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you look at offensively, right? The skill positions have depth and talent and youth, right? Defensively, that secondary in particular, a lot of talent, a lot of youth. There's a ton to work with there. And on top of it, you do have some quarterback flexibility here. Geno Smith signed a deal that frankly, they can exit out of if they want to by about mid-February, or they could look at it and say, no, we're not going to exit out of it. And that would effectively say, Geno's got another year there where he could either be a bridge or a part of the future. Geno, one of the parts of Geno wanting to be in Seattle and enjoying his time in Seattle, I think, was playing for Pete Carroll. So, it remains to be seen kind of what's going to happen at the quarterback position there. I think they have, off the top of my head, the 16th pick in the draft. There may be a quarterback there potentially available. Maybe it's a J.J. McCarthy, which, Macdonald was there in 2021. That was J.J. McCarthy's first real glimpse at the quarterback job. It wasn't until 2022 and 2023 that he fully took the reins, really blew up into the player that he was. However, obviously he knows Jim Harbaugh. He knows what Jim Harbaugh thinks of J.J. McCarthy, knows him as a leader. It would not be completely out of the realm of possibility to me that maybe they take a J.J. McCarthy and they look at Geno and they go, okay, well, he's going to be our bridge for a year while we sit J.J. and we groom J.J. on the NFL level. That's possible. I'd feel bad for Geno in that situation because he's waited forever for this opportunity. He's played reasonably well. He's shown he can be a capable starter on the NFL level. He's not, and I don't think he's a bottom third starter. I don't think he's probably somewhere in the middle. But as good as the rest of the surrounding pieces are, I think that's a team that could win with him. But my point is they just have flexibility at a position where they're not necessarily locked into Geno forever. And again, a lot of youth in the surrounding roster, both offensively and defensively.
But see, Rob, that speaks to part of why it's a stable organization. They put themselves in a situation with Geno where it's a really good contract for that very reason, right? Like, and you're right. When you look at the wide receiver weapons, when you look at who they've got at the running back room, there's some things that they need to shore up offensively on the offensive line. They have some issues they need to take care of, but you're 1,000% right. Like in my mind, if I'm not reporting this, you're not reporting this. I'm just saying if I stack my blocks of logic, makes a ton of sense to keep Geno around, see how the draft plays out. If somebody you love happens to be there, great. You take him. You can worry about that in a year. In the meantime, you give yourself the opportunity to slow develop JJ, which I think, having watched a lot of that Michigan, I don't think having JJ McCarthy sit for a year is a bad idea. I don't think having Michael Penix Jr. sit for a year is like, if you're in love with one of these quarterbacks available in the middle of the first round, having him sit for a year and learn from Geno makes a ton of sense to me. So it's a smart move by a smart organization to even be in this spot.
Penix and I would say Michael Penix and Bo Nix are more ready to go right away. Like those are two guys who have so much. They're older quarterbacks. They've faced different kinds of adversity in their career. Obviously, both being portal guys. They've really established themselves in second chance places. Nix going from Auburn to Oregon. Penix obviously going from Indiana to Washington. And so you're right. Like, it makes McCarthy, to me, makes a lot of sense because to me, if there's any quarterback who has a lot of upside, has leadership, has a good arm, has shown that he can take steps, but was also in an offense where they did not predicate a lot of things on him and there wasn't a ton of pressure. Hey, you got to carry us, you got to lead us all the time. If there's somebody who could really benefit from sitting and having a redshirt year and really learning everything and just absorbing everything, seeing how players lead, it would be a McCarthy. And, so that's why I wouldn't rule it out there. But as you said, I would be stunned at this point if you would move on from Geno, only because to me, he's not wildly priced in relation to the rest of the quarterback market. He's a bridge quarterback that can win with you right now. You can still be a playoff caliber team with him there. And so why get rid of that now, especially when it's so early in the offseason process and you don't really know how the quarterback, situation is going to work out. For all we know, J.J. McCarthy could light it up, kill all his interviews, and next thing you know, it's like, hey, well, he's going to be long gone by 16. I mean, we just don't know that yet. So it makes sense to me that Geno would spend
some time with JJ at the national championship game. And it's funny you mentioned that because I walked away from spending time with JJ thinking, look, one way or the other, I have questions about the Michigan offense and how much he was utilized. You cannot question that he's going to interview well. Like
he's going to win meetings.
Just all day, every day. You walked away from it and you thought, man, he's going to sit next to some, old dude that owns an NFL team and know every right thing to say in every right way. He's going to know the right way to order, like all the little things in a meeting with the ownership groups and with GMs. they're going to love him because it's right down the middle. As someone said to me around Michigan, he's been being groomed to be a starting quarterback since he was in elementary school, and you could feel that from him. So you're 1,000% right. I can see JJ winning them. I'm not sure what that has to do with how he actually played this year. And I tried to hammer Harbaugh a little bit at the Natty about why he wasn't throwing the ball more as an offense. If JJ is the best since Brady, he tap danced that like he does so well. He's basically the Fred Astaire of his generation when it comes to press conferences. He didn't answer, but I will say JJ's gonna crush it.
I'll just go ahead and answer that for you. He didn't have to.
Yeah,
like they won the national championship without having to. So hell, if you just pound people running the football, particularly Washington, why throw it? Do what you can do to ultimately win. But yeah, I talked to somebody really close to Jim Harbaugh, and I said to him when I was working on a piece about going into the title game about Penix and McCarthy and like, are these guys going to be dueling to be the fourth quarterback off the board in the draft? And how does one get up on the other? And I talked to somebody close to Harbaugh, and he just straight up said to me, he's like, when the opinions on JJ will solidify in terms of him really being a commodity when people start meeting with him. Like he's gonna blow people away in his interviews, and they're going to start to find a lot of reasons that they want him to be their quarterback in the future. So we'll see. That's a little bit of an early draft segment for everybody. Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
We'll cover, everybody calm down. We'll cover the draft. I do have to ask you one analogy, and I get to use this because our great friend and co-host, Jory Epstein, by the way, she's in Mobile. She's hanging out with the Senior Bowl, doing great work there. Be sure you're following her on social media if you weren't already, since she went viral with all of the clips of Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce from the field. Great job by her. But she would never get this analogy, so I'm just going to ask you because I get to use a movie analogy since Jory never gets these. You remember Office Space where they're like, exactly how many hours of work would you say you do here a week?
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out why some head coaches in the NFL are sitting there telling me, oh my God, like it's sun up to sundown, 20 hours a week, but they're not offensive or defensive guys. They're just CEOs. And then you got another guy that's getting the job that's going to be the defensive coordinator essentially while he's also the head coach. So like, is one of them just working less efficiently? Like if I'm a CEO head coach, do I just get to hang out in my office and play Madden all day until somebody needs me? Like explain this to me, C-Rob, because it seems like in this analogy, Mike Macdonald is going to be doing a lot more work than somebody that isn't necessarily in charge of the operations minute by minute.
Well, it's always like that. The first gig, especially for coaches, you want to talk about these 30-something coaches who get their first head coaching job. All they know is to wear themselves out, right? Wear holes in their shoes, because to them, they're like, they got that position by doing what? Busting their right? Their entire career up until that point. That's how they've gotten opportunities. So when you get these guys, other than maybe like Lane Kiffin when he was with the Raiders, I don't know that Lane Kiffin was, I think he was the one guy who I was like, I remember when Lane got that job, and I want to say he was like 32. We were like the same age, I think, like when he got that job. And I was like, pretty sure I put in more hours than this dude right now. So we saw how that ultimately ended. But every other 30-something head coach, I feel like, that gets a job absolutely, wears themselves out. And you'll often see they won't necessarily make it in that first stint, and it'll be their second time around. Raheem Morris, let's see how it goes in Atlanta, where they figure out a little more balance and a little more like how do they handle things? What did they do wrong? Things like that. So some of them, like Sean McVay, it's just basically they're like, I'm just gonna keep doing this till I burn out, and then I'll think about taking a job with Amazon, and then no, I'm gonna end up staying because I went and got the quarterback who makes my life a little bit easier. I think maybe there are the ones that transition and they're like, I'm going to go ahead and go get this quarterback who's going to help take some of the load off of me. Or I'm going to start to surround myself with maybe some more experienced coordinators who I can delegate to and not necessarily worry about it.
Yeah, the coordinator positioning, the coordinator hirings, I should say, I still think is one of the most important things we see out of any new head coach. Now, as we tape right now, Washington does not have a head coach yet, which is a little surprising, I think, for a lot of people because, laying it out, C-Rob, they knew they were moving on. They had a new ownership group. They brought together a committee to figure out how to bring everybody together. Like, they brought in all of these outside voices. I felt like there was going to be a swift and dramatic move from the Commanders at some point, and we haven't seen anything. We haven't really even heard any, the opposite of Atlanta. So what's going on in Washington?
Okay, so, to me, it's a little bit of a head scratcher because everybody you talk to, everybody was like Ben Johnson. Like, he's the guy That's who they're focused in on. That's who's going to end up with this job. No matter, I mean, you talk to agents of other coaches, you talk to other, personnel people in the league who knew Adam Peters, people that had conversations with Josh Harris in league circles, and everyone felt like they're going to get Ben Johnson. He's acquitted himself extremely well in the playoff run. He's done great things with Jared Goff. They're going to take a quarterback at 2, and they're going to match these two together, and that's how they're going to move forward with an organization. And then the Ben Johnson hire doesn't happen. And I'll be completely honest with you, I am confused about it. I've seen some of the reporting that's out there about, hey, maybe some of this was financial in terms of what he expected from a salary standpoint. I don't know about that. Like, I can't say that for sure is what happened here, but it was definitely a left turn that a lot of people did not expect. I think it shocked a lot of people. And it's interesting because the remaining sort of list of candidates that they have right now it's all defensive guys, right? So it's Aaron Glenn, the defensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions. It's Dan Quinn, the defensive coordinator of the Dallas Cowboys. It's Anthony Weaver, who's the assistant head coach and defensive line coach of the Ravens. And I don't know how you go from like, it's going to be Ben Johnson and we're going to, do the quarterback matchup. And this is how we're going to, and then what's left on your list is just a bunch of, a bunch of defensive guys. From what I understand as of Wednesday morning, okay, I can just tell you, like, after making a couple calls, there's no inclination, particularly when you reach out to agents that handle a bunch of other potential head coaches or people that are going to be in that cycle, have been in this cycle now, maybe in the cycle next year. They've got no indication that Washington wants to expand that group of 3. And I was talking to one agent today, got some super heavy hitter coaching clients and also some heavy hitting personnel level clients. And he said to me, and I thought this was kind of interesting, he said, there's 1 or 2 reasons. They already know who their second option is and they like that person out of the trio that they have. Or there's another option outside that 3, and they're being extremely quiet about who that individual is. And it's a very far off the books interest. And to me, I was like, of course, I'm like, is that Belichick? Because like my thought process is maybe they don't raise Belichick's name because they're like, let's not even bring it up unless we're really going to hire him, unless we're full go. Let's not do the Atlanta thing where there are a couple meetings, there's this and that, and then it doesn't happen. And it's like, well, what happened? Why didn't you hire him? Is this a Bill thing? Is it an Atlanta thing? So I asked, is this just because, they don't want to bring Bill up unless they know they're going to lock him in? And he said, I've got zero indication that they're interested in Bill Belichick. So this trio that is currently sitting there, and out of that threesome, I would say that Dan Quinn, playoff loss aside, which was not a good game for him. And, there's some other kind of red flag moments down the stretch there in Dallas. I would still say Dan Quinn, out of that group, the most experienced, the most results on paper. He's got a resume. He's been to a Super Bowl as a head coach. He's overseen a spectacularly talented but also productive defense in Dallas. And even the playoff failure was not all on Dan Quinn. It was like everybody on the entire roster and in the coaching staff, everybody failed on that one. So even the loss in the playoffs is hard to hang on him.
So I'll admit a bias for a moment. I went on a radio station in the DC area right when the offseason started, and I was asked, who's the best coach for DC? And I quickly said Belichick. And they clipped it off and put it up on my social medias. They tagged me in it. And I just got destroyed by Washington Commanders fans that reminded me my head is planted up my rear end. So if this could all turn around and Belichick could somehow get the gig, I'm not going to lie. There'd be an evil maniacal laugh. I wouldn't actually respond, but it still made sense to me. Like, if you're Washington, the reason it made sense, like my logic on it, if you're Washington, You have all the money in the world. You are trying to show the entire world that you're a legitimate franchise, and you'd be bringing in one of the best coaches of all time on a roster that I think has a lot of pieces you can actually build around. You have a ton of money to spend, and you have the number 2 pick in the draft. And if you're Belichick, you got offensive weapons. You got a couple of guys on the defensive side you like, and you got the number 2 pick in the draft. You can go get your quarterback. So, like, I actually kind of like this marriage for the two. I understand that it's never that simple, but C-Rob, for just the sake of my Menchies, like, yeah, I'm not much of a revenge replier, but my God, if this happens, I'll need like a 3-hour block just to go back one at a time with clown emojis and just re-emoji the people that clowned me. I want this to happen now.
I can see some sensibility in it when we talk about the roster. I don't know that Bill Belichick would necessarily want to coach a rookie quarterback, to be honest with you. You know, if that's the way, and if you're selecting a quarterback at 2, it's probably going to be the type of player that starts immediately. I don't know that you'd necessarily redshirt him, although, you know, who knows? So there's that. You know, defensively, there's some talent there. I wish they would have kept Montez Sweat.
Yeah, my God, yeah.
I get moving on from Chase Young. I've seen enough from Chase Young to go, okay, I can see where the issues are there. He does look like, reminds me a lot of, like, you know, the future does a 1-year contract with this team, does a 1-year contract with that team. You know, kind of like this Jadeveon Clowney move around, you know, guy who you're always waiting for them to blow up and live up to their talent. Offensively, there's talent there. So I do, again, I like the owner. I've really liked the general manager. But the one thing that is very clear about the Washington organization, you have to report to Adam Peters if you are the head coach. Adam Peters is the boss on that team. There's not going to be dual reporting where you have Adam Peters reporting to Josh Harris and then whoever the head coach is separately reporting to Josh Harris. No, they will report to Adam Peters. Adam Peters will report to Josh Harris. Very linear. And regardless of what's been reported out there about Bill Belichick and Atlanta, I will just tell you right now, absolutely inside Atlanta's franchise, they walked away from that dalliance with Belichick. It wasn't even a dalliance, obviously 2 meetings with him, feeling like, hey, there's going to be some change inside our organization. We're going to hire this guy. Like, there are going to be some people that, if not fired, they're going to have their duties significantly altered, and they're going to look at it like a demotion. And, you know, I have heard people, I've heard well, he just wants to coach. I don't think anybody believed that inside Atlanta. Like, maybe that's what he's selling, but I'm going to tell you right now, the Atlanta Falcons did not believe, oh, he's just coming here to coach and he has no problem reporting to a general manager or having the power structure laid out and him only being the coaching part of it. That is certainly not how they felt when they decided to go with Raheem Morris.
So let's look at the Ben Johnson side of this real quick, because your point on so much of the structure, Ben Johnson, to be clear, it at least looks like Ben Johnson went in, met the ownership group, saw the power structure, and then looked around and said, nah, I'm good. Like, this is the ultimate, no, I do not want to date you. Like, this to me is right. A little surprising because, as you've mentioned to me before and really educated me on, coaches look at jobs in cycles. So Ben Johnson obviously looked around and figured out whatever he saw with the Commanders didn't put him in the situation to be successful enough on the field that he's willing to go back and risk it. Like, I know coaches bet on themselves, but man, I know Detroit's got a lot of weapons, but he just walked away from likely a 5 or 6 year deal that would have paid him upwards of $60-70 million to try it again next year. Like, that's a statement to me.
Well, and here's the thing, and I'll tell you something that when Jory and I did this piece ranking jobs, right? The jobs that were available at the time, you know, I had someone say to me, and I'll paraphrase here, but I thought it was a really good point. He's like, hey, why would I be in a hurry to bounce to another organization when I sit here and I look and I go, we got an awesome quarterback in place right now. Our arrow is up. This is what I'm attached to right now. I'm good. I don't just have, it's 1 of 32. I don't necessarily have to take the 1 of 32 because I'm attached to an extremely good situation. I think when you look at Bobby Slowick and you go, okay, well, Bobby Slowick, OC with the Houston Texans, just signed a contract extension. It's tied to CJ Stroud. And he's tied to Nico Collins, and he's tied to Tank Dell. And we'll see. He's probably, you know, they'll try to bring back Dalton Schultz. You know, he's tied to a really good offensive situation in Houston where he's like, I don't have to be in a hurry to get out of here and get another job. I got a great quarterback right now. I'm sitting very pretty. Ben Johnson, same situation. When you look at Detroit and you look all the multitude of, Jameson Williams looks like he's getting better, right? So that's a piece that's going to get better in Detroit. Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, that offensive line, Jared Goff. If they did anything in the postseason to convince you of anything, it's that they're a damn good offensive team. And, so returning there, you're thinking, what's going to happen? I returned here once, and what happened? We got better. I did better. My resume looks better. Maybe I'll go back and we'll go a step further. Maybe we'll put another second half together in the NFC title game next time, and we'll be the Super Bowl team next year. It's always possible. So I get it, from the standpoint of Ben Johnson saying, well, look, if I'm going to leave, it's going to be for my checklist. And so maybe that means the money's got to be up here. Maybe that means here's my laundry list of other things. That's what I want. That's what I'm leaving for. Otherwise, hey, I'm going to go back to this great thing we got going.
Yeah, and I'll add one other thing, too, that I think is interesting about both the guys you mentioned as you were talking. Thinking about Ben Johnson and Bobby Sloak, they both work for head coaches that give them the autonomy to be creative in whatever way they want, right? So
absolutely.
You get to cook with the ingredients that are really good, and you get to cook whatever you want. And the restaurant's GM is like, hey, man, you do your thing. I'm not going to get in the way of it.
Yep.
You're right. C-Rob, opening eyes. We're just getting started because we got to open your eyes. Not all coordinator positions are created equal. There were some huge hirings this week. What do they mean for each of their respective teams? We'll break it down next. All right, C-Rob, I know we got a bunch of coordinators to get to. I just got to ask you quick. I'm going to ask you a selfish question just because I'm talking to you about coordinators. My beloved Raiders still haven't hired an offensive coordinator. For you, when you're looking around and you see that a guy isn't named, how concerned do you get if that doesn't happen quickly for a team?
Well, typically, if we're here, right, we're in January, we're in late January, my thought process is, okay, is an assistant, you're not going to hire it's not going to go coordinator for coordinator, right? You'd be hiring let's say you're saying, well, we can't go and steal the Chiefs OC, or we can't go and, steal a 49ers OC, but we can go get the quarterback's coach, or we can that. So to me, when we're this late in the process, it's usually one of two things, maybe three things. You waited a while to sort out your head coach. Number two, which you might want to give this some thought, you sorted out your head coach, but your head coach is of a level of experience that they don't have a book ready of coaches to go out and fill their coaching staff, which is what typically happens when you see somebody ascend extremely quickly to a head coaching job. What did Antonio Pierce do? He ascended extremely quickly to the head coaching job of the Raiders. I think it stands to reason, unlike, let's say, a Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn, when an owner says, hey, if I hire you, do you have a staff? Dan says, here's my book. Boom. We're gonna go get this guy. Boom, boom, boom. This is why we're gonna go get all these and da 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 da. When it's a situation like an Antonio Pierce, or let's say when Nick Sirianni went into Philadelphia initially, there are coaches who come in and they go and they are attractive sometimes to the front office or even ownership, where they go, well, this is good. Dan Quinn's gonna come in and he's got his whole. Here's all the guys I want. Here's who I want to bring in. Or I'm gonna hire this guy who says, oh yeah, you want to help me, build my staff? Yeah, let's have those conversations. So I think there's probably a little bit of that with Antonio Pierce in terms of building out the staff, in particular the coordinator positions. Although I also would not discount that potentially there is a coach in play that is still in the system right now in terms of the Super Bowl teams.
But you blow my mind, because this is what I've said for years in front of microphones. I get concerned when you start hearing that somebody passed on a job as an offensive or defensive coordinator because of that very book. Like in my mind, if I'm coming in and interviewing, they're like, all right, who do you want as your co-host on the show? And I'm like, I want C-Rob. And then all of a sudden, 2 days later, they say, well, C-Rob has declined that offer. Like now we're going down, like, did I really have my things in a row? Did I have my ducks in a row? And a lot of times you see people have to start going down and down and down the checklist. It makes me question a little bit of the hire. It just never occurred to me that maybe when you had this rapid ascension and you're in the middle of trying to find a way to get your team into the playoffs, you might not have a book, which also makes Telesco make a little bit of sense because you're bringing in a GM that obviously has a book, right? So now the GM and the coach got to sit down and compare said book. Like this is, you've blown my mind, C-Rob.
There is a dance that occurs with general managers and head coaches, particularly when they are veteran general managers, which obviously Telesco was. We've seen that play out in Philadelphia with Howie Roseman. Okay. I've talked about this before. It literally unfolded after we talked about it on the podcast and so many other earlier shows. Howie was a veteran GM. Doug Peterson had made changes on his coaching staff. He won a Super Bowl. Things declined a bit. And once they started pressing on Doug, we want to make changes to your coaching staff. Doug put his foot in the sand and said, nope, no more. I'm good. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do what I want to do with my head coaches or my assistant coaches. And that's when they parted company. So then they switched to a new guy, right? He goes down the same exact path as Doug Peterson. And how does he end up staying in his job? Because of the front. I know they did the song and the dance in the press conference, and it was Nick Sirianni making all these decisions. Nick Sirianni still has his job because he was flexible when it came to the coaching staff and the coordinators, and was willing to work with ownership and the general manager. Now Telesco, goes in there with Antonio Pierce. I don't think there's an element of inflexibility at all. But I do think there's an element of you've got one guy with a ton of experience. And as you said, he's going to know a lot of different candidates that he's interested in. And then discussing that with Pierce. Are these going to be good? Is it a good chemistry fit? Are these, what's the personality types? You do have to think that through, particularly when, Pierce and Telesco, it's not like they've got this long, super long track record together and they're perfectly matched. Like they're still learning each other too. And I think when you're fitting together a coaching staff under a young coach who ascended very quickly, not necessarily having a multitude of options for coordinators, you have to make sure that you find that right fit. God forbid you get a coordinator in there and a year in, a la, let's say like Vic Fangio and Mike McDaniel, where do I think that could have continued working? Yeah. Do I think the players were super hyped about Vic and his system and just, honestly, the kind of guy Vic is, like, I think a lot of those players were like, I don't know about this dude. Like, this is kind of, even when Vic was in Denver, I remember like the players wanting to play music in practice. And then Vic was like, I don't know why I'm the head coach. I don't got to play music in practice. We don't have to have music in practice. Players were like, okay, this doesn't feel right. Like this guy's not a great fit for us.
And personality with all of these coaches have to match up. They have to align at some level. You mentioned Vic Fangio. The Eagles make two hires. Vic Fangio is defensive coordinator, Kellen Moore is offense coordinator. And I just felt like I was suddenly watching Celebrity Family Feud or something. Like where they went out and they picked two huge, massive names. Like this doesn't feel accidental to me, Rob, that they're bringing in two huge brands at each coordinator.
No, and there are a couple of different ways. Like number one, you're taking Nick Sirianni and you're removing him. He very much sort of just be the CEO coach now, right? Because you have an offensive coordinator who's extremely experienced, right? Worked with different quarterbacks, had success with different quarterbacks, who can structure that offense, run it, play call it, all the things that he needs to do. Kellen Moore can do that on his own. Vic Fangio, same deal. He can structure that defense. He can play call the defense. He can scheme it. They've got familiarity with Vic Fangio, by the way. He was a consultant there prior to this. So it's not, there's not a lack of knowledge in what he necessarily brings to the table. Plus they went to the Super Bowl when this guy was an advisor for them, helping them to structure defenses down the stretch. And so it frees Nick Sirianni up to be, he's now delegated. He doesn't have to have his hands in a lot of different things. And, I think that's ultimately why you saw those being the two coordinators who got named, which by the way, when you look at the coordinators they replaced, there's a ton in terms of experience level, far more experience there between this offensive and defensive coordinator, which probably tells you something about what was happening last year. Maybe, the Brian Johnson got to where he got, which was great, but, wasn't fully ready to be in that moment and handle all the things they had to handle and then still develop Jalen Hurts and keep him in tip-top form. Sean Desai, whatever happened there happened. It was something wasn't working. And so you don't see sort of a replacement in the middle of the season like that very often. They're eliminating that from happening now because these are just two people who there's no question about their experience or their production. You know what you're getting with both of them.
But we are talking about an offensive coordinator in Kellen Moore that has run some different things than Philly has run, right?
Yeah.
So it is going to be interesting. That part of the fit, if you think about Kellen Moore, My God, to go from being the offensive coordinator for Dak to being the offensive coordinator for Justin Herbert to now being the offensive coordinator for Jalen Hurts. Like, I'm sitting here thinking, like, did Kellen Moore hit the life lottery as an OC? Like, at least every single time he gets a quarterback, like, he's not sitting here saying, okay, what am I going to do to make the most of this bad quarterback situation? But it is a different style.
I'll be curious. So if there is one thing that has maybe bothered me a little bit about Kellen Moore throughout his stops, right? Since he got, Dallas with the Chargers and now moves on to Philly, there's always a lingering sense of like, what is our identity? Like, what are we? And you would hear different things before seasons. Mike McCarthy, we're going to run the ball more. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And they go out and they're throwing it all over the place. And you're like, you can see like there's going to be some friction now between Mike and Kellen because they don't have this like clear running identity that Mike necessarily wanted, which is funny because now that Mike called plays this year, I don't know that they necessarily had the clear running identity that Mike wanted as well. So, maybe that's not on Kellen. I did think it was interesting coming out of Dallas. Once he was gone, maybe the complexity of what the receivers were dealing with and the quarterback was dealing with, it sounded like it caused some chemistry problems. It seemed like once he was out the door, I don't know if it was sight adjustments. I don't know if it was how the route tree was structured, but it seemed to be like there was a ton on the plate of both the wide receivers and the quarterback. I don't know if that's something that really necessarily ever changes. And I'm curious to see how that manifests itself with him handling Jalen Hurts and a very obviously extremely talented set of receivers. And when you just look at the tight end and the receiver spot, I'll be interested to see how intricate it is.
Like a vocal group of receivers too. Not that all receivers aren't a little vocal, but come on, man. He's going into a room where, let's be real, if A.J. Brown doesn't like it, we're going to hear about it quickly.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Like social media is going to know.
Yeah, no, there's no question. I mean, I would argue that aside from, like Keenan Allen, not that Keenan Allen's not vocal. I mean, he definitely is. And he's a receiver who's he's earned his spurs, right? But I do think that AJ Brown is a little bit different. He's I don't want to say he's on the Stephon Diggs level, right? Because that's like the full blown, like he's going to let you have it the second he feels like things aren't necessarily going right. But he's not that far off. He's like a slightly middling second behind maybe a Stephon Diggs. So I would say Moore needs to prepare for that because certainly in Dallas, CeeDee Lamb was not going to be someone who's going to be out there, being like, hey, this ain't working. What this guy's doing is not working. You weren't going to get that from really any of that wide receiver room, at least at that time. And you sure as hell weren't going to get it from Dak. Dak wasn't going to go out there and be like, Kellen's not doing this right. Or Jalen Hurts, as we saw how he kind of reacted down the stretch. His endorsement of Nick Sirianni was there, but it was not as strong as I felt like other people in that locker room were. So I also think that's part of what the Kellen situation is. You're putting a layer between Nick and Jalen, where now Jalen knows 100% of my emotion, investment, time, everything I'm doing, my capital is going to be tied up in Kellen Moore. And having the confidence of knowing that Kellen's done this on his own before. He's done this with successful quarterbacks before. Dak did get better, by the way, with Kellen Moore. Like, there's no discounting that Dak did become a better player. Now, he didn't reach this plateau that he did this year, but he made strides. So it's going to be different. And I think Jalen Hurts is going to be asked to do some different things, but that is probably what Philadelphia is looking for. They don't, they want him to handle the blitz better. They want him to throw in the middle of the field, right? It's going to be some wrinkles that he's going to have to pick up and maybe push his game forward.
Staying in the state of Pennsylvania, but the other team that everybody pays too much attention to all the time, the Steelers are hiring Arthur Smith as an offensive coordinator. And I want to stress this because I think we have to remember head coaches that aren't successful, it doesn't suddenly mean they forgot how to do what they were great at. And Arthur Smith was a very good offensive coordinator for the Titans. Very good. There are a lot of questions about how he used his weapons with the Falcons, why he used his weapons that way. Those questions did not exist in Nashville. So I don't know where things went wrong with the Falcons in his approach. But if I'm the Steelers, all I have to do is put on the tape of what happened when the Titans were at their best, and I see what the best of Arthur Smith can be. So in a lot of ways, this to me, C-Rob, not only makes sense, but it feels like a really good fit.
Perfect fit, right? Does it not feel like that? If someone had said to me, put Arthur Smith somewhere, I would have said Pittsburgh. I would have said absolutely put him, or, because he matches up in terms of what he did in Tennessee when he was an offensive coordinator. It is very much a 1-to-1 comparison with Pittsburgh. The head coach, Mike Tomlin, very similar in a lot of respects to Mike Vrabel, right? He's another no bullshit guy. He's another, how he handles players, remarkably similar to Mike Vrabel. The identity of the team that Mike Tomlin wants is very similar to what Arthur Smith was doing with Mike Vrabel. They want to have a strong offensive line. They want to have a dedicated run game. As soon as I heard this, I was like, Najee Harris, that arrow feels up now to me, because if there's one thing that Arthur Smith's going to go in and try to get sorted out, it's going to be the run game. He's going to say, we're going to fix this. This should have been the identity of the team. This should be a guy who's scratching his ceiling and not, I feel like, failing to live up to what we all thought, Najee Harris really could be on the NFL level. I think that's ultimately going to get fixed. Quarterback will be interesting. I don't know. I guess the first thing that went off, the top of my mind is I'm like, well, Ryan Tannehill's got a backup spot and an ability to potentially take the starting quarterback spot now, because I would not be surprised at all if the Steelers decided, let's bring in Ryan Tannehill, who knows this guy's system. I thought Tannehill could be the backup quarterback in Atlanta had Arthur Smith stayed. I think you could argue it's a need, right? And now who's the starter? Is it going to be Mason Rudolph? Is it going to be Kenny Pickett? Where are you going with the starting position? But bringing Tannehill in would not surprise me at all, because he's going to be a guy that, even if he's not starting, can really help implement the things that Arthur Smith wants to do. It's a great fit, I think, in Pittsburgh. I'll be stunned if this falls flat.
I feel like Ryan Tannehill is going to have the opportunity to start somewhere next year. And we need to couch conversations a little differently.
He's healthy.
If he's healthy, but he's not the type of quarterback that's going to go out and win you the Super Bowl, but he's at least the type of quarterback that can put you in situations to be competitive. And in a league that's built around 500 football, we all know that. I feel like there's going to be opportunity once the draft has come through and we realize there are 2 or 3 teams that are just stuck at the quarterback position. Somebody's going to couch it as Tannehill is going to be our Geno, right? Tannehill is going to be our Baker. I know those are all very different comps, but I feel like Tannehill is going to have an opportunity. And why not Pittsburgh? They don't, in my mind, they don't have an answer at quarterback, and they're not picking at a spot in the draft where they can get an answer.
See, I think it's sort of a late career repeat of what happened in Tennessee, where he went in, he wasn't the starter. Marcus Mariota was the starter, but you kind of felt like he's going to have his chance. Like Marcus, the room for error for Marcus shrank considerably once Ryan Tannehill was on the roster, because it was like, hey, we got a capable guy, who he put enough together in Miami that he could absolutely win this job. Now it's a later period of Tannehill's career. There have been more injuries. I do think age has taken a toll. He's not necessarily the same level of athlete that he was when he showed up in Tennessee. Now, that said, like I said, there's a need. They do need an experienced backup who can win the job if necessary. So it just, to me, it makes a lot of sense. I'd be stunned. I can't believe they're going to bail on Kenny Pickett yet. I know some people are going to say that's crazy. He was just terrible last year. Well, I think he has a better offensive coordinator now. Now let's see what ultimately happens. And oh, by the way, if you bring in a Ryan Tannehill, there's a credible threat behind him, which I don't think Trubisky, Mason Rudolph was really a credible threat to unseat a guy who was just drafted in the first round. Ryan Tannehill, though, yeah, he's a credible threat, especially if everybody else around that roster is healthy. And I also think he's a quarterback that could help, like a George Pickens, who continues to need an adult in the room, right? He continues to need somebody who's like, chill out. We're going to get you the ball. I know how to feed a guy. I'm a veteran. I know how to get a guy a ball and keep him involved and happy. Tannehill would definitely be that. So now saying all this, he's not going to end up there because we talked all about this.
But wherever he ends up, I also do think he's the type of quarterback, at least from the people I know that have known him. I don't know him personally. Seems like the type of guy that is also going to be a positive in the locker room, a net positive to helping whatever quarterback he's with, right? Yeah. And I do think that there's some element of, I always keep saying that the Mahomes thing doesn't necessarily work as well without an Alex Smith to help him along in that process. Like, I think that there's a key there. And I don't want to belittle Alex Smith's career or anyone else by saying they can be that person's Alex Smith. But I do think if I ran an organization today and I needed to bring in a quarterback that could just hold the reins, I know that he's going to help whoever that quarterback is in their ascension because he's a total pro in the way he seems to handle the locker room. So
yeah, I agree.
I like him from a million different levels.
And I almost wonder, like, if you're Ryan Tannehill at this stage, now you'll have made a lot of money, so maybe you don't want to go the coaching route. But if you did, I could absolutely see Ryan Tannehill going, you know what? I saw what Josh McCown did. Let me play this out. I'll start as many years as I can. And then when I get to the point where I'm either, I'm like a stopgap guy, still make some decent coin, but I can be a really good support backup. And then when I'm 40, I'm a coaching candidate.
Right.
I'm a quarterback's coach immediately. And not just a quarterback's coach, but a quarterback's coach who's able to be fast tracked to being an offensive coordinator, who's able to eventually be fast tracked to be a head coach. And by 45, I'm a head coaching candidate on the circuit. I could see Ryan Tannehill being that guy.
Yeah. To tie it all back into the way we started the show, he'll be antique by then. 45 in a world where 36-year-olds are the head coaches. That's the world we live in. I'll be back Thursday with Zero Blitz, hanging out with Frank Schwab. Of course, you can follow us on social media at Charles Robinson, at Jason Fitz, at SJ Rochelle for Stone, our producer, doing God's work. All right. As always, tell everybody, C-Rob, how we can continue to support the incredible legacy of Terez Paylor.
Check out breakingtea.com/Terez for your all juice tee or hoodie. We're actually going to start putting together the 2024 edition of that team pretty soon. And remember that the proceeds from that purchase go to support the Terez Paylor Scholarship at Howard University. You can also donate to that scholarship directly, as well as the one in his name at Missouri if you check out our podcast description.
While you're checking out the description, leave us that 5-star review, rate, subscribe, tell your friends, family, enemies, tell everybody to hang out with us. Next week, we'll be together in one room in Las Vegas from the Super Bowl next Wednesday with things just getting weird. I'm telling you, I can only promise you one thing. It will get weird. So hang out with us next week with more inside coverage. Thanks for listening, y'all.